On the night the city held its breath for a meteor shower, Eli Méndez drove the last tram. He loved the way the rails hummed like low cello strings, how street lamps made a necklace across Harbor City's shoulders, how window reflection could put a second moon in a stranger's lap. Eli was 43, a careful night owl with ink on his fingers from the transit schedule and salt-dried pail on his boots from the winter bay. When he wasn't coaxing the tram through its route, he looked up, always up, cataloging constellations between the cables and wires as if they were notes only he could hear. He lived in a narrow apartment above a bakery that rose dough at unholy hours. His telescope perched on the fire escape, aimed at the slice of sky the buildings allowed. On his kitchen table, a printed email from the Orion Harbor Observatory. Your application to the Night Outreach Fellowship has been received. They wanted a tram driver who could teach stargazing to kids on late trains, to make commuters look out the windows and see distance. His fingers had trembled reading it. He'd imagined standing at the front of a car full of fourth graders, holding a laser pointer and saying, "Look, Orion's belt is a crooked smile tonight," and watching 100 small chests lift in tandem. On the last run, he had exactly 3 passengers: a teenager sleeping like a folded map, an elderly woman holding a bouquet of dandelions as if they were contraband, and a man with a paper crown who wore his loneliness like formal wear. Eli, who counted people by the weight of their silence, loved them all in the small, constant way you love a city. The meteor forecast had stamped people onto rooftops and parking garages. As the tram took the curve past the Tide Moon Pier, Eli glanced toward the black glass of the bay. Out there the water held a rumor. It would bloom blue tonight with noctiluca, a plankton that glowed if touched. The radio chattered. The meteorologists narrated the sky as if it were a game with a score. Eli's stop at the end of the line was a terminal no one ever photographed, concrete, practical, a place where shifts shook hands. He braked, hummed the tram into stillness, and stepped onto the platform. The air smelled like tin and pretzels. A wind shouldered his jacket. The city made its endless list of noises. He would lock up, log the car, and then hurry to the bay to watch the meteors strike out to sea like handwriting. But as he reached for the brake lever, a lens cap, clumsy disc, rebellious coin, rolled from his jacket pocket, performed a spectacular, slow-motion curve beneath the platform gate, and dropped with a mischievous plunk between sleeper and rail. My luck, he told the empty terminal. He glanced at the rails. The power was down, then at the lens cap winking like a dark moon. He crouched, stretched, misjudged. His foot slipped on frost he hadn't respected. The world performed a magic trick on him. First there was the drop. A short one, petty, but his stomach still left as if it owed someone money. Then the shock of cold rail, the slap of breath leaving, the reel of light. And then everything, sound, motion, the honest ache of the night, got turned down like the city was a song in a neighbor's apartment and someone on the other side of the wall had important paperwork. Eli thought, with a small and very practical grief, I was going to show kids where to point their eyes. Darkness pressed. A seam opened in it, blue and tender. The cold rail became a cool bench, his jacket a shawl, the platform a floor with scuffed tiles that reflected stars. He blinked. The midnight depot waited around him. An enormous station with a domed ceiling painted the deep of tea at dusk. The constellations Eli knew had moved. They'd unlatched themselves and wandered, as if you could take them off like jewelry and let them nap wherever. Ticket boards clicked. Announcements trilled, not in words, but in scents, cardamom, fresh rain, and textures. A finger dragged across velvet, a fingertip on glass. A tram glided past, ghost white, without rails, passengers inside made of hush. At a wooden kiosk sat a woman with a crown of knitting needles in her hair and a name embroidered across her cardigan, Auntie Dusk. Her eyes had laughed a long time before her mouth learned to. She stamped a ticket with a thump that sent fireflies shivering out from its edges, noticed Eli, and tilted her head the way cats do when they decide you might be furniture. "Late arrival," she said, her voice cinnamon warm. "Do you need a map, sugar?" Eli's tongue found its manners. "Is this, am I?" "Between," Auntie Dusk said matter-of-factly. "Not gone, not back. The Midnight Depot. We connect what thinks it's separate." She pushed forward a cup of something that smelled like childhood and a sweater. "Drink. The first idea is always hydration." Eli took the cup. Steam wrote lace over his nose. "I fell," he said. "You did," Auntie Dusk agreed. "Happens. Platforms are drama queens in winter. Most folks wake up sore with a story. A handful wander in for a spell." She tapped the bench beside her. "Sit. There's a wait." "For what?" "For you to decide which direction you think is forward." She reached under the counter and produced a ticket strip the color of first daylight. On it, E. Méndez, temporary seating. "If you want," she added gently, "you can ride to the after and see if it fits." Eli, whose soul had always worn its tap shoes at the edge of decisions, stared at the ticket and felt his fingers ache for the tram brake. "Do people come back?" "A fair number," Auntie Dusk said. "Not because the after is bad, but because mud under the nails is a hard habit to quit." He sat. The depot breathed around him. 1,000 conversations whispered, 1,000 goodbyes practiced. Across the marble, a door marked Archives of First Laughs stood ajar, and Eli heard babies without bodies chortle like bubbles. Another door bore a plaque. Borrowed breezes. The air under it smelled like June. A sign pointed down a corridor, the kindling grounds. "What's that?" Eli asked, nodding toward the sign. "Nursery for stories," Auntie Dusk said, stamping another ticket. "Not babies, beginnings. Sparks that haven't decided to be anybody yet. They learn what warm feels like. What enough feels like, what gravity thinks about company. Then they choose a life that matches the kind of mischief they're in the mood for." "Can I see?" The question slipped out before the part of him that wore caution could veto it. Auntie Dusk pretended to be stern. "You visitors, always wanting the tour." She pressed her stamp to his hand. It left a small magnolia blue as breath mint. "Don't fall in. Again, please." Eli followed the kindling ground signs down a hall that seemed to lengthen with interest. A door swung on a hinge that had remembered 100,000 arrivals. He stepped into a landscape that refused architecture. Hills folded into rooms. Rooms opened into sky-flavored courtyards. Staircases led into piles of leaves. He smelled chalk and oranges and rain before it happens. Sparks clustered like lanterns. They weren't exactly light, more like the idea of a glimmer deciding what shape to take. Some hovered over tables, building towers out of the letters maybe and not yet. Some rolled along the grass, squealing, their glee a language. A figure with shoulders like a library and a beard like a weather report shepherded them, murmuring, gentle. "We don't rush a Kindle." "Wow," Eli whispered, and the word, shy, found itself multiplied. A spark drifted close. It was small and not impressed by objectives. It tasted the air near Eli's nose, then buzzed a stern little tchk that sounded like you smell like buses and promises. It was faintly gold, with a ring of red at its edges, as if it had spent time near a stove. Its tag read 719. "Hi," Eli said. "Hi," 719 said, and in that syllable Eli heard 100 teenage eye rolls, 1,000 midnight jokes, one grandmother's mmHmm. "You're very dense." "Rude," Eli said lightly, charmed. "I'm Eli. I drive a tram." 719 rotated. "What's a tram?" "A long room that moves," Eli said. "It learns your weight and practices being gentle." "Why?" "So people don't fall over." "Why?" Eli looked at the Sparks tag, which didn't blink. "You ask why a lot." "I am rehearsing refusing," 719 said primly. "You can't make me go down." "Down? To life." 719 flopped onto his shoulder without warning, perched like a friendly migraine. "They keep trying to hand me a door. I told them I haven't decided if door is a useful shape." The bearded shepherd ambled over. "Ah," he said, baritone chuckle. 719 has learned no as an art form. "She does it with style," Eli said. "I'm not a she," 719 said. "Or I might be. Or I might be a field. Or a recipe. I am undecided and tired." The shepherd, his name slot simply read first attendant, considered Eli with a half-smile. "You have the kindly impatience of a bus timetable," he said. "Would you like to volunteer? We sometimes enlist passers-through to give our Kindles a tour of small things worth staying for." Eli, who had once thought he would never be asked for help in any room that smelled like thunder and chalk, nodded before fear could raise a hand. "What do I do?" "Take 719 for a walk," the attendant said. "Show them how a life can be carried with both hands." "Fine," 719 said. "But I am not promising interest." "Same," Eli said softly. They wandered. He showed 719 the memory loom, where two Sparks knotted a cardigan out of daybreak and someone nearby practiced tying a square knot made of rain. He showed them the tutorials you don't know you're taking. How to sit in a chair you'll someday fancy is yours. How to be the person who wakes first to make coffee. How to hold a stranger's gaze long enough for them to decide they haven't disappeared. 719 pretended nothing mattered and then reached, without admitting as much, for the bowl of wind chimes labeled borrowed breezes and rang one. The sound wrinkled the air like laughter that knows it's about to cry. "It's so much," 719 muttered, offended by delight. "Do you have any less?" Eli pointed to a hallway stitched of quiet. The listening corridor. On its walls, people had hung bread and photographs and notes that said the way her hair smelled when it rained. They stood and listened to the sounds the objects made. A loaf of sourdough explained yeast to a seashell. A photograph hummed like a fridge. 719 placed their edge against a thumb-smudged bus transfer ticket tacked at eye level. It sang a little. Coins on a counter, a driver's "how's your night," the exhale of a person who sits and lets their bones stop being a to-do list. "You could try that life," Eli said. "The ticket kind of life. The small reliable kindness kind." "No," 719 said. "Maybe." They reached a balcony that opened into the sky. It wasn't a sky, exactly, more like a roof that had decided to be a suggestion. They leaned over. Through it, very far away, Eli could see Harbor City bent over its own brightness, the bay like black silk, lights moving along the tram tracks like thought. He groaned before he could be decorous. "I need to go back." First attendant appeared as if summoned by need. "You may," he said. "There's a corridor back to the wake-up. But you can't take souvenirs." Eli glanced at 719, who had gone very still, as if learning how to be a dot in a map. "Can I work with 719 again tomorrow?" The attendant lifted a brow. Tomorrow is a strong word in this building. But yes. Auntie Dusk met Eli at the depot doors. She handed him a fresh ticket stamped return via breath. Lean toward the warm when you wake, she advised. The cold will be first. Answer the warm. How will I know which is which? Auntie Dusk grinned. You've been practicing all your life. He lay down on the bench, breath steadied like a train finding its tracks. The domed ceiling exhaled stardust. He closed his eyes. The cold arrived first, rail chill, elbow ache, a city buzzing like a neighborhood became electricity. And then the warm. Bakery below feeding the morning air sugar, the idea of coffee, of dough, of a street waking. His chest remembered how the world rushed his ears. He opened his eyes to the underbelly of the platform, the lens cap within reach like a moral. He lay still and laughed, just a little, out of shock and gratitude and some early, fragile thing called purpose. He picked up the lens cap, climbed back to his tram, and decided he could fit 2 lives inside one body if he drove carefully. The one that stopped at every station and the one that listened for the station under the station, where you could hear 1,000 people making their first decision of the day. That evening, when he looked up, the first meteor scratched a silver insistence across the sky. Eli promised the sky he'd be back at the depot soon, voluntarily, with better questions. The sky, professional, went on being vast. He put the tram in gear. The city moved, and far overhead, where the glass roof of the between opened for anyone who remembered to need it, a small spark with a tag that read 719 rung a breeze and pretended it hadn't enjoyed the sound. A week of days unspooled like string. Eli drove, fixed, listened, and, when sleep reached for him like a coat, ducked sideways through the seam only he noticed and found himself back at the depot. Auntie Dusk always had a cup waiting. You smell like brake dust and hope, she'd say, which in that place counted as a love poem. In the kindling grounds, 719 had a talent for arriving where Eli wasn't looking. I'm not needy, they announced one night by popping out of his jacket pocket like a coin. Of course not, Eli said solemnly. You're a boundary with opinions. They walked. The grounds adjusted to match what a person needed. Stairs unlocked. Doors developed handles, rooms offered soup. 719 pretended to hate soup and ate 2 bowls. Eli showed them the pocket museum of refusals, a case of broken pencils labeled when it's worth walking away. He showed them the gravity table, where Kindles practiced falling onto cushions and learning that up and down are agreements, not laws. He took them to the Taste of Wind, a kiosk where you could press your face to a ring of air and inhale a weather you hadn't met yet. 719 chose New Orleans in July and had the decency to gasp. Why do you like those tiny things? 719 asked as they sat on a balcony made of stacked postcards. Because tiny is loyal, Eli said. Big can disappoint you loudly. Tiny keeps working while you're offended. They peered through the between's roof at Harbor City. Below, a woman sketched the harbor with charcoal. A boy in a fire escape garden scolded a tomato. A man balanced a pie on his bicycle's handlebars and didn't drop it. Do you like being a driver? 719 asked. I like being the room people get to themselves, Eli said. I like knowing when to brake without frightening anyone. I like counting a person's day by their shoulders. You could do the star job too, 719 said, confessing interest by couching it as observation. Eli smiled crooked. Maybe. I'm waiting to hear. Meanwhile, I have a schedule and a sandwich. The attendant arrived pushing a cart stacked with boxes labeled in tidy block letters. Small things worth staying for. He lifted a lid. Inside, A mix of objects that shouldn't have shared a drawer. A bottle cap, a miniature wooden spoon, a bus token, a matchbook, a button the pearl of a grandmother's cardigan. Pick 3, he told 719. Then go to the crossings. Try them with Earth on. I'm not going, 719 said lightly. The way you pretend a parade isn't yours to join. Carry them anyway, attendant said, implacable as gravity. Humor and old bureaucracy. 719 glared, Glow's glare. It's their hobby, and plunged their little edge into the box. They came up with a metro transfer ticket, a spin top, and a paper crane with one wing folded in a way that sighed fix me. Eli felt his heart take a step toward his own ribs. Good choices, he said softly. Coincidence, 719 said. The crossings sat at the edge of the kindling grounds where the floor remembered how to be a shoreline. Waves reached, reconsidered, reached again. Across the water. Earth in the distance, harbor lights in a bowl, meteors penciling themselves. Buses practicing tenderness at corners. Auntie Dusk's knitting needles glowing faintly through a high window where she completed the shape of someone else's night. Ready? The attendant asked 719. No, 719 said, furious. Yes, you can piggyback, the attendant told Eli. Not walk in, not like a possession. But you can ride a sense. Hear with them, taste with them, be a parallel. If you're respectful, I'll be furniture, Eli promised. The attendant smiled. Furniture saves lives. The water itself opened like a tram door. 719 flicked, uncertain, then went, not quick but real. Eli inhaled, answered the warm, and slipped. He did not expect the way Earth felt when you weren't holding it by the handles. Color disagreed with itself cheerfully. Smells argued politely. The wind knew his name. He did not land anywhere. He leaned into a street corner, a gust, a moment. 719 gusted with him. Two sparks jammed into the instep of a city. They found themselves perched on the shoulder of a woman crossing Bay and Alder with a pastry box and a toddler dangling from Logic. The woman's hair smelled like flour. Her shoulders rolled like someone who had learned to ignore back pain in the name of breakfast. Okay, 719 whispered in Eli's head, pretending to be unimpressed. This is a lot of feel. Borrowed bodies are noisy, Eli agreed. Lean into the quiet part. It'll take a minute to find. They jumped currents. Latched to a lamppost, they watched a night shift nurse peel the corner of her paper cup to make a spout so it wouldn't drip onto her notes. The nurse looked up at the city like it was a stern friend. They drifted to a stairwell where two teenagers tuned a cheap guitar. They didn't play well, they played sincere. People walking by dropped coins reflexively, like mercy. They perched on the hood of a parked car where the hood still held sun from hours ago, warm as a baked stone, and a cat slept with the authority of elected officials. They rode a bus, no, Eli's tram, near the end of its route. Through the glass, the city handed them tenderness at 24 frames per second. A girl fell asleep with her forehead against the handbag of a woman who pretended not to notice. A man moved his foot so as not to crush a moth. A street vendor chased a dollar bill down the aisle like a child chasing a kite and then laughed at himself, delighted by the way he looked from outside. You can live inside these moments, Eli said very quietly. They're all real. They're not the cover of a life. They're the life. 719 made a rough sound like a match's strike. I can feel a shape, they admitted. It's not purpose. I hate that word. It tries to be the only thing. This is smaller. A kindle. First warmth, Eli said. 719 clutched the paper crane tighter. Don't make it important. I won't, Eli promised. They hopped to the Tide Moon Pier, where a crowd had gathered with jars to swirl the Noctiluca water. A boy dared his grandmother to stick her hand into the bay. She did, squealing, glowing blue from wrist to rumor. Music somewhere. People narrating the ocean back to itself. Help me watch, a voice said right next to them, startling both Spark and furniture. It belonged to a woman in a raincoat, hair in a practical knot, kneeling by the railing, adjusting a rack of tubes pointed to the glowing water. Amaya Lopez, her badge said, City College, Marine Ecology. Eli recognized her. She was one of his regulars, always with a handheld spectrometer, always respectful to the car, always nodding at him with a gratitude that felt like she kept a list of good buses. He'd once carried her extra batteries in his pocket without making a fuss. She didn't see them, how could she? But she spoke like he had hovered near. If the bloom peaks by midnight, she told the intern beside her, we log every 5 minutes. Don't look for special. Look for pattern. The ocean doesn't owe us fireworks. She owes us a schedule. The intern grinned. That's why I like you, Dr. Lopez. You're romantic about data. God, don't tell my mother, Amaya said, adjusting another tube until the reflection went right. She thinks I married the bay. 719 nudged Eli. This one feels like a bus driver. Be careful, Eli said, feeling his chest rearrange itself. You're paying me a compliment. A gull performed a theft and the crowd applauded. A child asked the moon if it was awake. The water answered, yes, and I'm bright because you stirred me. 719 held the transfer ticket like a talisman and breathed the city in and out for the very first time. They jumped at last to Eli's block, where the bakery vent exhaled bread warmth and the apartment stair complained the way old wood does. Eli did not mean to, but he lingered outside his own building to see the window with the telescope and the mug he hadn't washed. He felt, with a small embarrassment and a larger tenderness, the shape of his own life from the outside. In the stairwell he heard his neighbor Mr. Das teaching his parakeet to swear in Gujarati. Someone played the trumpet badly on the 3rd floor, someone apologized to a spider on the 2nd. In his kitchen, his phone on the table glowed with a notification from the Orion Harbor Observatory. Fellowship interview, final round. Tomorrow at 5 p.m. 719 leaned hard against his shoulder. That's you, they said, more like accusation than hope. It might be, Eli said, blood fizzing with a terror he welcomed. They slipped back through the seam before morning ruined magic. In the depot, Auntie Dusk handed him a cookie as if he were the one learning to be new. How's our 719? She asked. They're pretending not to be interested, Eli said. It's going great. For a few hours the world held. Then the between decided to test the seams. On the evening of the interview, as Eli tied a tie that resisted like vines, 719 appeared on his dresser. Wings of their paper crane flared and tilted alarmingly toward the floor. That's not how gravity works, Eli said, catching them. Careful, I'm falling, 719 said, scandalized. But the wrong way. They looked small and honest for the first time. I don't know how to pick. Pick what? A place, 719 said, frustrated. A door to arrive through. A mother. A family. I don't want to be sorted like mail. You don't load yourself into a life, Eli said, words arriving before certainty. You meet it. You build the house as you walk through it. 719 put their little edge against his collarbone. Push me, they demanded. Tell me the direction. Eli opened his mouth to say down. What came out was, toward. Is that a compass point? It will be, he said. 719 went very still. Then they did something reckless. They grabbed his interview time like thread in their small hands and pulled. The clock jumped. No, Eli said, ridiculous, as if you can scold time. But a city bus knew the shape of late. He grabbed his coat. He ran. Down on the street, Harbor City rehearsed calamity and grace. At the crosswalk, a kid stumbled. Eli set him upright with a, "You've got this," that had helped 1,000 ankles. At the corner, two dogs negotiated who was the excellent boy. A man in a suit, Rex, Eli's least favorite regular, blocked the sidewalk and yelled into a phone. Eli dodged. He reached the observatory with 6 minutes to spare, hair-performing weather. The receptionist smiled like she'd been bomb in another life and said, "They're running 3 minutes behind." The universe bends toward mercy. 719 went quiet in his pocket, a blessed absence of insistence. Eli exhaled, straightened his tie, and pictured himself pointing out constellations to a whole car full of kids who'd come to view themselves as telescopes. He pictured, too, the tram brake under his hand. When the door opened, the interviewers smiled a practiced smile. They asked about curriculum, about safety, about attention spans and batteries and budgets. Eli answered as if answering a child's anxiety, calm, specific, generous. He talked about streetlight glare and noise made holy by naming it. He talked about bringing a thermos of cocoa and telling the last train home that stars and passengers both are better if someone is watching for their exit. He did not talk about the depot. He talked around it, which made the room, oddly, quieter. Then someone asked, "What would you say to a kid who doesn't want to look?" Eli thought of 719, belligerent, hugging a paper crane. "I'd say, you don't have to," he replied. "I'd say, want something else. Want warmth. Want a small laugh. Want to know what your favorite kind of quiet is. I'd say, start there. The sky comes later." He left the room with his jaw unclenched for the first time in a year. On the tram that night, Amaya boarded with sea in her hair and tired in her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. No reason to, except that she paid attention. "Interview," Eli said, half smiling, half terrified. "You'll be good," Amaya said with the soft violence of someone who rarely guessed. She lifted a jar into his view. Inside, the day's last blue glows swirled into a galaxy by her wrist. For luck, the jar lit Eli's hands. "Thank you," he said, and 719, lurking, pretended not to see. At 2:07 a.m., a different light found them. Not the kind you wear when someone who liked you said your name. A light like a clipboard. 3 figures stood in the aisle, crisp, pastel, exact. They wore cardigans and pins that read audit. They had clipboards. Their smiles had rules. Anyone else would have called them commuters. Eli recognized their shape. The Between's auditors, the tidy force that smoothed folds where reality wrinkled itself. "Evening," the lead auditor said pleasantly, as if he wished to sell Eli a library card. "Inspection. Tickets, please," a second said, and her eyes slid to Eli's pocket where 719 did a very bad impression of inanimate. "Hi," 719 whispered. "We should go." "You can't run on your own," the auditor said, to the pocket, to the spark, to anyone with a professional sense of mischief. "Come along. We'll tuck you back into not yet where you belong. And you," he nodded to Eli, "will sleep it off like you dreamed it. It'll be tidier." Eli, who had spent decades breaking gently for the sake of strangers' knees, felt something unpracticed stand up inside him. "No," he said. "My dear sir," the auditor said in a tone trained to forgive. "You are alive by accident and courtesy. Kindly don't take liberties." 719 isn't a liberty, Eli said, surprising himself with the exactness of belief. "They're a promise. You can audit me later. Tonight, they ride the route." And he rang the bell, and Harbor City did him the favor of pretending not to notice while he ran from something you cannot ordinarily outrun. The tram accelerated into a night that grew teeth. The tram had never moved like this. Eli coaxed the current along its braid. The rails, those old reliable lines of hum, felt like a staff and he like a conductor who finally been given the right song. Outside, the city kept inventing corners for him to turn. The auditors, expressionless, paced the aisle in a slow, unbeatable logic. "Where?" Eli whispered. "Tide moon," 719 said, brighter than fear. "There is a crossing there. Big enough for arguments." The tram dove into a tunnel like a throat cleared. Out the other side, the bay holding itself like a breath. Noctiluca laced the edges of the pier, shock blue, polite. Amaya stood at the railing with her tubes. She looked up, startled, as the tram, very deliberately not scheduled to arrive, slid along the pier itself and stopped with the precision of a caterer at a surprise party. "Is this a bus now?" she asked the knight. "Temporary detour," Eli said, and opened the doors. The auditors descended with the mien of people correcting a tide table. "Hand over the Kindle," one said. "The queue is long. The forms have already been filed." Down the pier, an old man in a coat as long as a dark story lit a lantern. He had a posture like a lighthouse and a face like next Tuesday. "You brought friends, Eli," he observed. "We can accommodate." "Do I know you?" Eli asked. He did, and he didn't. The between liked to wear a local hat. "I am keeper enough," the man said. "Names are uncomfortable shoes in weather like this." 719 clung to Eli's collar like a child at a swimming lesson. The keeper nodded to them. "Little heat," he said. "Do you want rule or do you want reason?" "I want a shortcut," 719 snapped. "Then you're already headed toward reason," the keeper said with embarrassing cheer. The auditors raised their clipboards and the knight developed bullet points. "We'll be quick," the lead promised, an apology in his tone like a paper cut. The keeper shook his lantern once. The water answered. Blue bloomed outward, brighter where hands reached in, where bare feet kicked, where people wrote their names with their palms and the bay said, "Yes, I see you." The keeper's light became a circle on the planks. Within it, a staircase made of tide, rising. Into the light, the auditor said to 719, patient, pitying. "We will return you to the queue. It is almost your turn. 2 eras, perhaps 3. 719 looked at the stairs. Looked at Eli. Looked at Amaya glancing between gel jars and the argument. Looked at Harbor City, which refused to be neat. "How about you go into the light," 719 said, undermining diplomacy. The second auditor sighed, which made the gulls change seats. "This is sad," she said. "Kindles become stubborn because they've overheard romance." "Or kindness," Eli offered. "Same thing," she said, annoyed. "Incomplete data." The keeper reached into his pocket, produced a top, and spun it on the pier. It hummed like a bee loafing into summer. 719 stared, pulled out their own, the one from the box, and spun it beside his. It wobbled, leaned, recovered. It refused to fall, exactly how 719 liked. "Try an experiment," the keeper suggested gently. He pointed to the crowd. Families, lonely people, bored cousins, loud uncles, Amaya, a trumpet player, a child in a dinosaur hoodie. 3 bartenders on break, an oyster shucker, a woman in a wheelchair, a man with a broken arm whose sling was autographed heel ugly by an indelicate friend. Do something small that only 3 will notice. See if it is enough. 719 bristled. Enough for what? To feel like a direction, the keeper said. They slid off Eli's shoulder. They went to a young man whose jaw was a problem and whose fingers trembled with the habit of anger. 719 tugged his sleeve toward the glow, the chorus of strangers cheering as someone skinny dipped with permission. The man scowled like he'd trained for it, then, betrayed by his own feet, stepped into the water. It lit him to the ribs. He cried without tears. He laughed without pride. He said, "Oh, the way people say it when for dawns on them." 719 went to a woman with a broken watch and curled her hand around a borrowed time. They nudged a child toward a dropped mitten and the child put it on like a magic trick. They stalled a gull so it would miss a sandwich and the sandwich would meet a hunger it deserved. Small violences undone, small alchemies permitted. The auditors stamped their forms, annoyed to be charmed. "We are behind schedule," the lead announced, offended by the concept of festival. Eli put his hand on the gate between tram and pier. "I will take them back." He was surprised by the steadiness of himself. "To the depot, if they want." 719 spun their top again. It settled. It danced. I want down," they admitted. "Down where?" the auditor asked. "Into which address? Which hospital? Which willing woman? We have forms." 719 hesitated. "The part of the city that smells like bread." "Not a form," the auditor sighed. "Then give me the form," Eli said, "throw tight. Give me mine. I'll sign for them." "You would trade," the auditor said, curiosity finally showing. Clipboard lowered. The gulls stopped rearranging. The water held its breath. Eli thought of his telescope, of Amaya's jar, of the boy sleeping on the tram with an algebra book curled like a cat in his lap. He thought of the time he'd pulled the brake so gently that a woman in heels didn't have to put down her baby to find the pole. He thought of Auntie Dusk's tea, the kindling grounds, 719's small bossy courage. He said, "Yes." "No," 719 exploded, genuinely furious. "That is not the game. You cannot cash yourself for me. I am not a check." "I don't mind," Eli said, surprised by how true it was. "I am full." "Full is not finished," Amaya said sharply from the rail, as if she'd misunderstood but kindly on purpose. "Don't you dare make me build an outreach program without a driver who knows how to announce Perseus with a detour on 8th. The keeper smiled, the way you do at a joke that tastes like faith. He tipped the lantern toward the water and the water typed a new sentence across the pier. "Dear auditors, what if there is enough?" The letters glowed seawater blue, a handwriting old as falling. The lead auditor considered, which was not in his job description. "We can make an exception," he said stiffly, like a man taking off shoes in a house that likes bare feet. "We can let the Kindle choose without assignment. A wild arrival. The forms will get over it." "Where?" 719 whispered, shaking. "Toward," Eli answered. The staircase of water descended into the bay. Not up to the after, but down, into now. The crowd hushed in that human way that invents its own cathedral. 719 turned to Eli, and in their small light he saw 1,000 no's that had been practiced for this yes. He crouched, ridiculous, on a pier, in a strapless night where auditors take notes, and held out his hand. 719 pressed their warmth to his palm. "Thank you" tried to be a word and failed. It became home instead. They went. The water took them, luminous, delighted. Somewhere in a small apartment above a bakery, a woman laughed and startled at the same time and had an opinion about butter. Somewhere near a stadium, two men who had tried every option decided to try one more, and one of them woke from a nap with salt on his tongue and cried like someone was tuning his name. Somewhere, a stormlight flickered and a midwife grinned and said, "Ah," and someone yelled for towels. The auditors sighed, ticked boxes, pretending not to look pleased. "It won't be tidy," the lead warned. "It never is," the keeper said happily. Eli, who had just offered both his hands to the world and had them returned, leaned against the rail like a man allowed to keep breathing. "Go," Amaya told him, shoving his shoulder. "Your car isn't licensed for metaphors." He laughed, helpless with relief. "Thank you," he told her. "Buy me dumplings," she said. "Later, after you teach me Orion's crooked smile. I have students who think stars are a rumor." The tram rolled backward along the pier, as if even it took a bow. The night went on being big. Back at the depot, Auntie Dusk waited with 2 cups of tea. "You smell like algae and rule-breaking," she said with undisguised pride. "I tried to give my life to a form," Eli confessed. "Bless your heart," she said, which in that place meant I see your courage and don't be foolish all at once. "Sit, rest, you're busy. Will I ever see 719? He asked, unexpected ache in his throat. "Oh, honey," Auntie Dusk said, eyes bright. "Every day. They'll be under everything." He closed his eyes and the depot exhaled. Trains, laughter, timetables, cups, heels, prayers, forms, mercy. He slept as if someone had gently held his foot against the brake. In the mornings, Harbor City woke like a cat, stretch, yawn, pretend indifference, ask for breakfast. Eli made coffee in a French press that thought it was a ritual. He put on his jacket that always forgave him. He wrote "It's okay to be astonished" on a sticky note and stuck it to his mirror because it liked the light there. The email from Orion Harbor Observatory arrived on a Tuesday with a subject line so gentle he almost missed it. Fellowship offer, night outreach. He sat on the edge of the tub and laughed until he cried, which is an excellent way to water the tile. He started the following week. Half his shift still on the tram, he couldn't quit its hum, half on rooftops and in schoolyards and in the car itself. Pointing a green laser at a sky children had been trained to ignore and saying, "This is Perseus with his myth in the wrong pocket. This is Cassiopeia, vain and forgiven. That smeared light is not a cloud, it's the city being so full of stars it forgot its edges." He learned how to hold a crowd, which is the same as holding a sleeping child, move slow, commit. He learned that his favorite quiet was the 3 seconds after a class of 4th graders gasped together. He learned to accept the compliments of janitors. Amaya came to the first session like a person going to a concert for which they learned an instrument. She leaned on the rail beside him and corrected his fact about Noctiluca not at all, which he accepted as trust. They found each other in small ways. Dumplings after shifts, trading thermoses, teaching the other how to smell the weather before the apps. She told him about growing up an hour inland with a creek that tasted like pennies and how she'd plotted her way to the bay like a cartographer of salt. He told her about his father's toolbox, about turning 7 and knowing the names of every stop on his favorite route because he wanted to memorize a city before it memorized him. They did not give it a name. Names are shoes with laces. They walked. On Thursdays, Eli volunteered at the community Lighthouse library, a repurposed firehouse where children sat at the base of an old brass pole and decided what magic counted as nonfiction. On Fridays, he visited his mother across town, who called him by his full name when she needed him and by Micello when she needed herself. He and his sister argued about the best empanada in the city and then agreed on whichever one they were eating. He sent a postcard to the bakery across the street from himself that read, simply, "You're saving people with bread. Keep going." At night he still walked the seam. Not every night. Mortals have to be mortal to keep the pattern honest. But often enough that Auntie Dusk began saving his favorite cup. A chipped yellow one with "Be nice to your bones" written on it in a hand that had loved a certain kind of chalkboard. He visited the kindling grounds, where 719 was now absent in a way that meant present somewhere else. He found, tacked to the listening corridor wall, a new object. A paper crane with one wing folded and then fixed, the crease softened by too many fingers smoothing it. It hummed like a lullaby written in pencil. He pressed his ear to it and heard a laugh in a kitchen, someone arguing about butter, a hand that smelled like flour. "Hello," he told it. The depot had a lost and found of hearts. People checked in sleeves like tickets. A man in a tux cried because he'd left a promise in a coat pocket in 1998. Auntie Dusk knitted him a reminder. Eli sometimes sat there and mended metaphors. His hands, which had expected to be only practical, learned a new small kindness. How to stitch a sentence closed without leaving a scar you'd brag about. One late autumn evening a year after the night on the pier, he drove the last tram beneath a sky that had misplaced all its patience and decided to be meteor again. The car filled with spectators, couples holding spare blankets, a teenager with a telescope bigger than his excuses, 3 nuns in sneakers, 2 toddlers whose parents had miscalculated bedtime, a man who always claimed he didn't believe in anything and always pointed the loudest when miracles kept their appointment anyway. At Tide Moon Pier he opened the doors and the city poured out, human enough to deserve forgiveness. He stepped down to help a woman with an unwieldy stroller. The Noctiluca didn't glow tonight. The bay was a silk that decided to keep secrets. That was okay. Not every occasion needs confetti. At the railing stood a woman with a baby balanced like gravity trusts her. 2 men fussed near a stroller with the clinic bracelet still on it, eyes wide with the animal fear of first times. The baby yawned exactly like a cat understanding taxes. They all swayed. One of the men looked at Eli with the exhausted gratitude of a hospital corridor. "We thought we'd miss it," he said, voice raw. "The shower. But you were late." He laughed, and it was the laugh of someone whose heart had just learned the word elastic. "Thank you. Late on purpose," Eli said. "Stars are terrible with schedules. They forgive me." The baby looked around as if the pier belonged to her. A ribbon from someone's hair landed on her blanket. A paper crane, sloppy, earnest, wing corrected by chubby fingers, sat in the stroller's cup holder. Eli had the unlovely, beautiful feeling of being known by a stranger. He didn't require proof. He simply said, "Welcome," and meant to hear, to this, to all of it. A meteor scratched the dark. The crowd bowed its heads like a congregation that had rehearsed together. Eli pointed out Andromeda's sigh, and a boy on his father's shoulders mispronounced it into Amdomida, which the sky accepted as correct. Amaya leaned into him. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm new," he said, proud. "You're new every night," she corrected, kinder. After shift, after cocoa, after 2 small crises involving lost mittens and found phones, after making a trumpet player promise to consider other keys. Eli climbed to his fire escape and sat with his telescope and thought of the stamp on his hand the first night. A small blue magnolia that never rubbed off. He held his cup. He listened. There was always something to hear. A bus's brakes for giving a corner. A woman singing to her dinner. The seam of the between fluttering, adjusting its weight, letting a new bride in. A city makes a long sound with 1,000 throats, and a human who will love it will learn to sing harmony. In the depot, ante-dusk, knitting needles rattling like a friendly storm, finished a scarf the color of keeping on and held it up to the light. We did good, she told the ceiling, by which she meant all of them. First attendant harumphed in agreement, which was his way of blowing a kiss across the lives he'd midwifed. The auditors sat on a bench and admitted, only to each other, that exceptions are the sweetest paperwork. Down on earth, a bakery timer dinged. A baby that had once been a belligerent Kindle dreamed of the taste of wind and smiled in her sleep. Her mother licked sugar off her own thumb and decided the rumor about butter had been wrong, and deliciously so. 2 men ordered more swaddles online with the urgency of air traffic control. The bay did not glow. It didn't need to. Eli closed one eye, aligned the sight, and found the Andromeda Galaxy a smudge you could clean with belief. He made a note for the morning. Teach the middle schoolers how to find a faint thing without scolding it for not being loud. He thought of 719 becoming a proper noun somewhere. He thought of the tram's hum. He thought of his mother's voice, the word miclo braided through a sentence about 3 for 1 plantains. He thought of the city's old bones loving him enough to let him be new. He lifted his mug. To small, he toasted, softly. Across the alley, a neighbor on a balcony he'd never met lifted their mug back as if they'd eavesdropped on coincidence and wanted to be polite to it. In the midnight depot, a new ticket chattered out of the machine for a soul that would one day grow into a laugh so contagious the CDC would file a newsletter. Ante-dusk stamped it, lips pursed, approving. At the pier, a wind decided to be interesting. Amaya zipped her coat and looked up. Come on, she told the dark. Give me pattern. The dark obliged, as it does for people who mean well and don't demand fireworks. Above a tram rolling soundlessly into its bay, the world, very gently, stayed. And that was enough, which is another word for everything when you've finally learned how to count.